Welcome to the Masterclass series, Being Future Ready, brought to you by the Vadhwani Institute of Technology and Policy and the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. We are excited to bring forth leaders, academicians, policymakers, thinkers, strategists, and experts on emerging technologies where they will share their experience, expertise, and advice on digital transformation and the adoption of implementing emerging technologies in the government that results in stronger governance and better public service delivery. In this masterclass, we will have the following agenda for you. We would like to introduce ourselves. We are Vadhwani Institute of Technology and Policy from Vadhwani Foundation. One of the key benefits of the Masterclass series, Being Future Ready, is to meet and interact with industry experts, accomplished government leaders, academicians, and practitioners on emerging technologies and digital transformation. We learn in these sessions their experience, expertise, and advice on digital transformation and the adoption of implementing emerging technologies in the government that results in stronger governance and better public service delivery. To make this experience worthwhile, we will also be awarding a certificate of participation to all registered audience members who attend at least 50% of these masterclass sessions by IIMB and Vadhwani Foundation. So without much further ado, let's dive into our masterclass session today.
So namaskar and welcome to the masterclass series of Being Future Ready. This is the 10th episode of this particular series. We are very excited for today's session with our guest, Shri Saurabh Karn. And he is going to be talking about application of generative AI for making government future ready. Another episode in the generative AI series, if I can use that term. Before we begin, a few points for hygiene. We have the chat enabled in the Zoom as well as Q&A. And we urge our audience to use the chat or the Q&A to pose their questions as the masterclass commences. I will take around 5 minutes to quickly set the tone and introduce our partners and also our guests. So allow me to do that. Of course, in this agenda, we will look at introductions and then we will straight away deep dive into the topic with Saurabh Karn today. For introducing our partner at IIM Bangalore and the Center for Software and Information Technology Management, I'd like to invite Venkatesh, who would like to introduce CSITM at IIM.
Good morning all. This is Venkatesh Balakrishnan, managing the Center for Software and IT Management of IIM Bangalore. On behalf of the center, I take pleasure in welcoming the speaker for today's event, Mr. Saurabh Kumar, Purabi, and the entire of Vadhwani team, Rajnish Kumarji, and the entire of Digital India team, and all the participants for today's event. CSITM is a center of excellence in IIM Bangalore that has been in existence for decades. Professor Shankari Banerjee is the chairperson for the center, and this has been serving as a hub for open exchange of information among academia, government, and industry, and that way this masterclass series is of significance because this brings together everything. And the focus areas includes conducting events on emerging areas such as artificial intelligence, digital transformation, product management, and of late we have also started talking about ChatGPT, and we have had a couple of events around them as well. And we conduct varied events. Some of them are larger conference format events, residential with 2 or 3 days of activities. And some of them are webinars such as this. And we would request you to follow IIM Bangalore through social media such as LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. We have observed that many of these kind of interlocks and events lead to a lot of awareness about the events and the courses of IIM Bangalore, and some of them result in inquiries and they get converted into some courses as well, and we have seen that in the past. So we would request you to actively follow us on the social media. And with that said, I welcome you all once again, and I hand it back to Purabi.
I would like to now welcome our partners at National E-Governance Division, and nobody better than our CEO from NEGD, Shri Abhishek Singh Ji. So welcome to the 10th episode. Over to you to in fact introduce NEGD.
Thank you, Purvi, and thank you, Venkatesh, and indeed grateful to Saurabh for taking this session of the Digital India Dialogues, Digital India Masterclass, whichever way we call it. But the intent is clear about how do we disseminate information, how do we advocate about technology, and I must compliment Rajneesh for taking this forward. I had been occupied in several things, so I was not able to follow closely with the team, but really compliment the capacity building team of National E-Governance Division. And as we all know, National E-Governance Division, which is part of Digital India Corporation, is leading the key major Digital India initiatives for enabling better access to services, better access to information, bringing the government closer to the citizens. And a very important part of that is capacity. How do we augment capacity within the government? How do we ensure that we are always able to be up to date with technology? How do we are able to leverage it for ensuring that we implement projects by using the best of the available tools and technologies? And in that, we work very closely with partners from academia. We work closely with partners from industry, startups. And one of the initiatives about which you will be hearing today with Saurabh is the Nyay AI initiative, which has really tried to show how generative AI and how technologies like ChatGPT goes beyond the hype. Like very often people just use it for saying how magical it is, and it becomes like a toy with people. But how can we use the same technology, generative AI, the same power of these new emerging technologies in order to translate into something meaningful for citizens? So that's what such initiatives are doing, and I'm sure Saurabh will be talking more about it, and we're keen to hear from it. And the application that he'll be talking about will have multiple other applications. So all those who are from the government who have joined this masterclass today, they must also think of exploring ways and means. Can we use generative AI for helping farmers or for helping patients or enabling students to access better information? So all that is possible. He will be talking in the context of judicial judgments and all, and that's also major outcome. And I am sure he will mention how even the Supreme Court is looking at using it for speeding up the judicial process. So with these words, I once again congratulate the whole team of IIM Bangalore, the Vadhwani Institute, and NEGD for bringing this together, and welcome Saurabh for his talk today.
Thank you so much, Abhishek sir, for those kind words. And I would also like to take a moment to also share that we also have Rajneesh Kumar ji along with sir from NEGD, who's the director for NEGD. Rajneesh ji, would you like to add something before we move ahead?
Thank you, Purvi. I think sir has told us about the initiatives. I would now welcome Saurabh to please give his talk on the generative AI. And let's see how it can be useful to other domains of governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I clearly will not take too much time. We are Vadhwani Institute of Technology and Policy, and we'd like to quickly share a brief introduction about how we enable digital transformation that can increase the impact and outcomes of government policy initiatives and programs. And we work in 3 different verticals, as you can see. One of the areas is where we focus on skilling through academy and in-person and online classroom training interventions through workshops and courses. We also take that forward where we close the loop through the technology enabler vertical, where we are focused on demonstrating emerging technologies in government operations. And we also look at program and policy advocacy, focused on digital missions on skilling and entrepreneurship, as well as on data policy and data strategy. So without much further ado, it gives us great pleasure to invite our guest for today, Mr. Saurabh Karn, who is going to talk about on the 10th episode of the Masterclass series on application of generative AI for making governments future ready. A brief intro. Saurabh is the lead scientist at OpenAI, where he works on advancing the field of AI for law and justice. Saurabh is an engineer by education and alumnus of Teach for India, and has worked across education, policy, financial technology, and AI/ML applications in law and justice. He's one of the co-creators in Jugalbandi.ai, which got a lot of attention both nationally and internationally. Jugalbandi was picked up by Satya Nadella early this year, and since then, it is also being used by several organizations to power conversational AI in Indian languages. He's worked for Teach for India, Sony, and ONGC, and he holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Tezpur University, Assam. He's also completed a course on how to learn math for teachers and students from Stanford University, as well as completed the Anubhav lecture series at Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. He also has completed a program on AI for finance and NLP, artificial intelligence, from the Oxford University. We are excited for this session and we welcome you, Saurabh.
Before starting, let me just thank everyone who has taken time to join us on a Thursday morning. I will try to make it worthwhile for all of you. But in case there are things that we don't cover in this particular topic, because I think the problem that we started with, and as we were discussing, we wanted to give a framework for people to sort of think about these problems rather than showing just a couple of demonstrations of things. But before I start, I'll just I would want to first thank you, Vadvani Foundation. I am Bangalore, Digital India Corporation, NEGD. Personally thanking Abhishek Singh sir, Rajneesh sir, who I have had the fortune to know for some time now. I am Saurabh, and I am lead scientist at OpenAI. Our jam really is like that we envision open justice AI for all, right? Like, and in case there's a little bit of confusion in like whether what it is, it's Nyaya as in justice, right? And we are a collective of organizations working towards advancing the field of justice. What it basically means is that it's beyond a couple of not-for-profits. Now there are 5 founding collaborators of OpenAI initiative: Agami, ThoughtWorks, National Law School Bangalore, Rohini Nilikani Philanthropies, and Ekstep Foundation. But that is how we started, and now in terms of partner organizations, there are a lot of IITs, professors there, law schools across India, not just national law schools, but but other law schools as well, and more than 250 strong law student community which is working with us, right? Our belief is that there are thousands of entrepreneurs who need to jump into this space to advance the field of justice. And what we really enjoy doing is like building a community. We are very bullish on the idea that a community is one that would be needed to accelerate any sort of innovation whatsoever in this particular space, right? We occasionally also build state-of-the-art models in Indian legal text. Early this year, so one of the things that we have done is we have released a very efficient NLP pipeline for Indian legal documents. There are 3 AI models that we have worked over last 2 years, which performs really well on Indian judgments and things like that. Early this year, we also co-created Jugalbandi with Bhashni Mission, with the AI for Bharat, and OpenAI Mission. And the idea was very simple, that if you could bridge the comprehension and language gap, then a lot of services can be made available, which is one of the vision statements with unified language interfaces that National Language Translation Mission had basically put in. What we are going to be talking about, and this is probably a summary slide. If you don't take away anything, maybe this is all that you need to take away, and that would be sufficient. That would be my win. But what we will see is like just basic of large language models. I think when we talk about AI, I think the ambit is very broad. We could talk about language, we could talk about audio, text, and a lot of like nuances to it. But I think here we are going to restrict ourselves largely to large language models. And what you'll see is like what are the possibilities with respect to its application in government, and where it can remove certain bottlenecks in the processes that governments probably face today. Largely bureaucracy that faces today, right? And third thing that we will really cover, which is also the title of the series, which is like being future ready. What are some of the things that needs to be kept in mind as we venture into this brave new world, so to say. To start with, just like how airplanes are inspired by birds, but they don't really fly like birds, neural networks, which are the foundational blocks which is powering a lot of artificial intelligence work today, are inspired by brains, are inspired by how neurons fire. but they don't necessarily work like that, right? And it's a very important distinction. So in this talk, we will also not be covering stuff like whether AI can be sentient, whether it gains consciousness or not, right? We will be focusing only on what are some of the pragmatic areas where we see applications really contributing to the value generation. So I think the story really starts from somewhere around 2017. This is the time when I transitioned out of Teach for India, actually. Has no relevance to this talk. But during this time, transformer models came in. And transformer models, what they showed is that there was an algorithm now, which could, without any tricks, like really learn from data, right? And learn from like a very wide range of data. What followed was just a series of generative pre-trained models. So you took like a really large corpus of data, and then you basically created something which could be then fine-tuned for various tasks. But that in itself was powerful enough to generate cohesive text, right? So GPT, GPT-2, GPT-3 came in during this timeline, but really the breakthrough happened in 2022, where we realized that if we trained the model with a certain kind of data, which is instruction data, where what I'm describing is that if this is the instruction given to you, this is the kind of output I need, the system generalizes really, really well. And by creating this kind of data and training it, what makes possible ChatGPT that came out, right? So Instruct GPT, I think, was a very critical moment in this entire field of development in natural language processing that really showed us how do we sort of like play with some of these technologies, right? So really the thing is that transformer models are very good at learning and generalizing patterns in text. So a general pipeline, what it looks like is that you take Common Crawl. Common Crawl is an archive of everything that is there in the public internet, right? So they have crawlers all across internet. They get the text data and then they store it, and these are like gigabytes of data. You have Archive, which is a Cornell University's project, where a lot of research papers are basically put in. So again, you have really high quality text data coming in from there. You have Allen Institute, you have Wikipedia, you have GitHub, and you have Stack Exchange. So if you look at it from a lot of different domains, very high quality of data is now basically coming in. These are all machine readable data. We had, as I had shown in the previous slide, now we also had transformer models. So transformer models can learn the patterns of text from this data. And really what they are learning is that they are learning to predict the next word. Now, we have all gone through the fill in the blanks questionnaires during our education. And really what is happening is that you are asking this transformer that, see, I'm going to show you some part of the text data. Your job is to predict what is the next word that's going to come. Now, if you get it right, that's fine. If you don't get it right, then I'm going to penalize you. I'm going to change certain weights in these circles that you see here. And I will continue to do that till you start getting it right? So for example, if the sentence is the students opened their text, there are n number of different values that this could take and it will make complete sense. But what is most likely to come here, right? Now this probability distribution, whether books should come there, whether laptop should come there, whether exams should come there, whether minds should come there, this pattern is what is being learned from the public internet, right? And through instruction tuning, what I was showing here, what we also gained is an ability to change it, to modify it to a certain extent so that it is functioning like how I want it to. It is not just giving me what is the probability distribution from public internet, but it is now tuned to my particular use case, right? Also very interestingly, the pace of research in this particular space is very, very fast, right? So recent work on Othello GPT and things like that, they have demonstrated that these neural networks are not just learning the patterns of text, but they are creating a model of the real world in it, right? Like there are entities which are interacting with each other, right? And that's very exciting because if you could do that, there are highly complex problems that we could very confidently solve in this particular space, right? So that was a very quick introduction, very insufficient and short introduction to what large language models do. They do fill in the blanks, and once they do fill in the blanks really, really well, then we can train them and teach them how to do more sophisticated tasks, right? With generative AI, I think, if you look at the timelines, the GPT, GPT-2, GPT-3, all of these models used to do the same thing as what your Instruct GPT or Chat GPT does, which is like completing a sentence, right? It never got so much attention because one particular kind of interface was not exploited too much, and that was basically chat. And that's why when we think about possibilities with AI, Chatbot interface is just the beginning, and large language models are also just the beginning, right? So chat interfaces really work well with human beings, also because we are on a lot of messaging applications, so it comes very intuitive to us, but it might also be limiting. So one thing that I want to sort of like set a stage for, while I'm going to be showing a lot of examples which are relatable, where chat is probably the default interface, you can think about interfaces fundamentally differently. You can think about email as an interface and think about how AI can fundamentally change that. Chatbot interface should not become a limiting factor in terms of what you can imagine. That's the only point that I wanted to sort of make here, right? Now, in terms of applications of large language model in government settings, there are a couple of things that comes to my mind. One of the first ones is actually like public consultations, right? I think during national education policy formulation of it, almost 1.4 lakh comments were received on the policy. Now, and the team size is never like 1.4 lakh people are not working on this, not even like 10,000 for that matter, right? So if you think about it from a ratio perspective, the number of people who are working on reading, summarizing, organizing these comments, and then incorporating it in policy versus the volume of comments that they receive, it's humongous. Now, what AI can do is AI can basically help you summarize, classify some of these things. But let's take a view which is like slightly higher level. There are almost two kinds of use cases that you would find in government. One would be high stakes use cases, and second would be slightly low stakes use case. And by low stakes, I don't necessarily mean that the considerations with respect to safety, with respect to ethics, go any further down in those cases. But what I mean to say is that your ability to trust AI output or rely on it is going to vary depending on whether these are high stakes use cases or low stakes use cases. For example, in justice, we want to be very sure of whatever is the AI output. And that's why explainability is a very, very big thing for us, right? Similarly, a surety that all the responses are coming from an authoritative document and not necessarily something that GPT thinks is right? Like it's very critical in high stakes use cases. Some of the high stakes use cases could be like public consultation summarization. So these could be emergency response. So, for example, if there's a cyclone which has come because of which the wall in a particular school has suddenly collapsed. Usually, people would not know who do we reach out to, how do we reach out to them, right? And some of the solutions can really become both offline available as well as available on mobile, which can assist citizens in accessing some of those services, or at least reaching out to the right authorities. I think there's a lot of reading, writing, and reviewing work that happens in the government, and AI can basically help you by being your co-pilot in some of these particular cases, right? In terms of low stakes use cases, public inquiries, information dissemination, where you are by and large sure that there are n number of distinct kind of questions that come. These are very, very frequently asked questions, and people are reaching out because they don't know any other way where it can be this information can authentically be sourced, right? In some of those use cases, you could imagine a simple service. You could and that could really solve the problem of having a lot of people sitting and providing that information. To give you an example, a lot of grassroots not-for-profits who work in the justice space, they provide this kind of assistance to a lot of migrant workers, to a lot of farmers. Now, usually 30 to 40% of the capacity of these organizations is basically linked to provisioning of information. Information provisioning is one of the biggest things that we do as a country, right? Where we are trying to ensure that because of literacy and language barriers, there is no parity in information access, right? So public inquiries, information dissemination, and departmental question and answer. Now, usually and this happens both in government setting and private settings, where if a new joinee comes into the department, it usually takes them at least 2 to 3 months to get acquainted to the procedures, rules, and regulations to those departments, to that company. And now each of the organizations can imagine their own co-pilots, which basically work with new joinees, get them onboarded, get them acquainted to the documentations, the rules, the procedures, and things like that, right? Just a couple of takeaways here. Simpler flows, and probably one of the questions that a lot of you might even have in your mind, right? How do I basically implement it right away? The thing is that technology itself is almost 7 to 8 months old. There's a lot of work that has gone into making it available, accessible as a technology. But I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in contextualizing it, to satisfy all the needs that is required to implement it into a government setting, right? So nothing is probably available out of the box that you can put into a server and immediately start like playing with and satisfies all your criteria. For smaller, for narrower problems, for example, information dissemination, you could use a code base like Jugalbandi or other projects, and you could build something. But if you wanted more bespoke, more customized stuff, there's complex flows that is required. There will be requirement of dedicated engineering time in making that happen, right? So let's look at a couple of examples of it. The first example that we will see is going to be Jagrit. Jagrit is information provisioning for domestic violence use cases. Now, as you see this video, I want you to look out for how this technology is built, which comes towards the end of the video. First, just get a sense of like how a user is interacting with this. This will allow you to also sense like what are the different personas and how do you sort of account for that. I'm just going to play this video and just keep an eye on like how this technology is working.
मेरा पति कभी कभी बहुत गुस्सा करता है और उसी गुस्सा में मुझे मारता है। मैं उसे जेल नहीं भेजना चाहती हूँ, पर उसे थोड़ा डराने के लिए मैं कुछ कर सकती हूँ।
प्रदान की गई जानकारी के आधार पर ऐसा लगता है कि आप घरेलू हिंसा का अनुभव कर रहे हैं। आपको घरेलू हिंसा से महिलाओं की सुरक्षा अधिनियम 2005 के तहत घरेलू हिंसा के खिलाफ सुरक्षा और सहायता का दावा करने का अधिकार है।
Jagrit aims to help a person in such a situation by providing access to reliable legal information quickly and easily. It does so by using Bhashani speech models, which are used to convert user queries from Indian language to English. It also uses OpenAI's GPT model to reason on authoritative documents like laws, rules, FAQs to generate an answer. They act as a knowledge boundary for Jagrit and make sure that it provides accurate information. For this chatbot, the authoritative documents were prepared by the iPro Bono team. Further, the response generated by the GPT model is converted back into the original Indian language and sent back to the user as a text and voice message. The bot also provides up-to-date information specific to a user's situation. Here are a few examples.
मैं अपने हस्बैंड से अलग रहती हूँ, क्या फिर भी मैं कंप्लेंट फाइल कर सकती हूँ?
हाँ, भले ही आप अपने पति से अलग हो गई हों, फिर भी आप घरेलू हिंसा से महिलाओं की सुरक्षा अधिनियम PWDV अधिनियम के तहत शिकायत दर्ज कर सकती हैं। PWDV अधिनियम का दायरा समय और स्थान से सीमित नहीं है।
Jagrit has the capacity to understand the user even if they speak in both Hindi and English in the same question.
Yes, a transgender person who identifies themselves as a woman should be able to file a domestic violence complaint, but it ultimately depends on the discretion of the court. The Bombay High Court recently ruled that a transgender woman who has undergone sex reassignment surgery can be a woman under the PWDV Act and has the right to apply for interim maintenance in a domestic violence case.
Jagrit is essentially based on Jugalbandi, an open source platform built by AI for Bharat and OpenAI, and it can be extended to IVRS systems and can have multiple use cases such as property disputes, POXO Act cases, labor right cases, etc. Jagrit could also be modified to enable citizens to take action, such as applying and registering for legal aid via voice prompts on a chatbot instead of filling long forms. क्या आप मेरी ये फॉर्म भरने में मदद कर सकते हैं?
हाँ, मैं आपकी मदद कर सकता हूँ। आपका नाम क्या है?
मेरा नाम मीरा है।
आप कौन से तालुक से बोल रहे हो?
मैं कोलम तालुक से हूँ।
आपका मोबाइल नंबर क्या है?
मेरा नंबर 950141 है।
यहाँ आपका भरा हुआ कानूनी सहायता फॉर्म है।
If you want to try Jagrat yourself, scan here.
All right. So just very quick revision of this. I think the video was very self-sufficient to explain like how this whole stack really works. But really to take you to this thing, I think first thing to consider here is like where the users really are. The reason why Jugalbandi also got a lot of attention is because the choices were like probably like in right direction. There are almost 48 crore Indians who are using WhatsApp as a messaging app, and there are a lot of different platforms there where different persona types basically like coagulate, right? The user interface basically is something that you will have to think about in terms of where your users already are in some sense. So if there are departmental websites, that's the user interface. If it's the citizens, then you might want to see whether your citizens whether people who you want to reach out to are on like one or the other messaging apps, and that also basically ties down to the costing of it, right? Authoritative documents I think is a very important stuff, and I think most of the AI applications that I have seen use something called a retrieval augmented generation now, where the idea is that you can't always update these large language models. They're great at reasoning, but you can't update them. So even if you use ChatGPT, it will tell you that by my cutoff date of knowledge is September 2021. That's about it, right? So if you can't update the large language model, there has to be a way in which you are able to update the knowledge that it functions on. And those techniques are called retrieval augmented generation. Speech is going to become one of the biggest shifts in terms of like the interfaces, and that is something that we are learning from across the globe. With Bhashani models now, where languages, and when I say languages, I mean like both speech to text, translation, and text to speech again, right? Like this whole stack, right? In a lot of Indian languages, these are not available commercially. And thanks to Bhashani, the National Language Translation Mission, DIC, now some of these things are available. So you can also start envisioning your services being available in these particular languages. With respect to large language model, while we use GPT 3.5, GPT 4, depending on the use cases, there are a lot of open source models that's available, like Llama, Llama 2, Vicuna. There's like a list of these models which just come as a barrage since January this year. Moving on, we will look at a couple of use cases and then we'll revisit how do you sort of like think about this, and I will try to provide you with a framework in terms of like how do you think about these solutions, right? The other use case that really came up was knowledge research, and I think a lot of us have to rely on different rules, procedures to be conducting our work. And one thing that these models can do, and it's fundamentally like similar technology, is that it can give me a chat interface over some of the documents. So what I'm basically doing here is I have General Finance Rules of 2017, and I'm going to be uploading it. In the background, it's the same thing that's happening in Jagrat. It's just that we have taken an authoritative document, we are indexing it, and now I'll be able to ask questions on top of it, right? So I can ask it questions, for example, I don't know, what are the procedures for tendering? This is one question that I'm asking, and what it will basically try to do is it will find out the right portions in GFR 2017 and it will try to generate a response for me. So now I see that I have a response here. The procedure for tendering include the following methods: advertised tender inquiry, limited tender inquiry, two-stage bidding, single tender inquiry, electronic reverse auction, and the minimum time allowed for submission of bids should be 3 weeks from the date of publication, blah, 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 and further details, right? But really, when you think about trust in AI, I think for a lot of high stakes use cases, it becomes imperative that we are also citing how did this particular response get generated. In which case, citations or sources is a very critical element of these things, right? So on the right hand side, what we can see is that the system is also giving me what are the different portions of text. So on page 119 in GFR, I will find this particular excerpt which was relevant to answer this particular question. Similarly, on 122, I had this, on 123, I had this, and so on and so forth. So now I don't just have an answer to a query that I have, which I was able to ask in natural language, And God forbid, like for technical queries, it is almost always a problem, right? Like formulating your technical query so that a person can give you a very nuanced response to it. Here I was able to do like preliminary research by myself.
Saurabh, there's a question, I think it is by Abhishek sir. He's asking in this context, can such answers be cited as official answers?
I think the answer to this question is that an official will have to form the answer regardless whether an AI provides this answer or not. The only thing that this system basically allows you to do is it allows you to reduce the amount of search that you are doing. So you don't your draft 0 or your 0 to 1 in answering this particular question, that is reduced. So now you know what pages to read, what pages to not read, right? In terms of officially citing these answers, I think we are still a couple of level behind here, because fundamentally, like, isn't it adding an extra layer? Currently, we directly ask our procurement. Yes, absolutely, right? Like, but think about an officer, which is, if we have those official answers, maybe that can be made available. GFR 2017, all the exact text is given on the right hand side, right? But the idea is here not to replace what is already functioning really, really well, but really if there are areas, and maybe we will see a couple of examples of this as well, where we are not able to actually, let me switch and we can I'll try to answer your question, Abhishek sir, right? Knowledge research is one which can be very, very like generic, so you can customize it to your departmental queries and things like that. But the fourth example, and maybe I'll come to the example 3, is regulation chat, right? Something that we are building as part of like Samta, which is a company that I started a couple of months back. And what we are really doing here is we are trying to reduce the amount of time it takes for a lawyer to answer a particular legal query for their own legal research, right? So here I'm asking a question. So what we have done is we have indexed RBI's all the notifications since 1991. And for lawyers, it's usually a problem because people who are entering the legal profession, it usually takes a lot of time for them to get enough skill to be able to doing really high quality legal research, right? Like it usually requires them to understand and learn certain keywords and things like that. Here, what I'm doing is I'm asking RBI like chat this question: what are the legal provisions under which the remedy can be sought in case of dishonoring of the check, right? One, it gives me the response to this, but now what it's also doing is it's giving me the master circular numbers, and then there's citation available here, right? Now, when I click on this citation, what happens is that I get redirected to the page which is on the Reserve Bank of India's website, right? This allows us to basically go to the source where the answer is provided. So while this can be at a very high level, broad level, the nuance is almost always brought in by the human beings. And a very cursory or tangential example, if I take, right? I was watching a movie yesterday, which is Ford versus Ferrari. And for those of you who have not seen it, right? While two teams of Ford had the same car, it was the person who was riding the car who really mattered, right? And I think that's really the key takeaway here, that machines would be there, they would be really great equalizer and enhancers of capabilities, but I think it will fundamentally depend on human beings and how they sort of like use technology for their work, right? The idea of showing the regulation chat is that a lot of work that is required to research on whether something is permitted or not, or even identifying right documents to be cited, these systems can greatly help in those particular use cases. I also saw that there was a question related to how can scheme delivery and those things can be helped. I think that was one of the first use cases that we started with. And I'm just going to quickly show a demonstration of this as well.
So I just recorded some audio with speaking in Hindi, and of course using code mixing, I said eligible and so on. And then I'm uploading this to WhatsApp. This is being picked up from there, and then you run the Bhashini models, which transcribe it into Hindi text that you see here. Then they are being translated, sent to the GPT model, which has given this response, right? यह देखने के लिए कि क्या आप PM किसान के लिए योग्य हैं, मुझे आपकी श्रेणी, आय की स्थिति और भूमि के प्रकार की जांच करने की आवश्यकता होगी. So basically it is saying, I need more details on certain things. And you can, of course, for those who don't read or find it more convenient to listen, they can play.
यह देखने के लिए कि क्या आप पीएम किसान के लिए योग्य हैं, मुझे आपकी श्रेणी, आय की स्थिति और भूमि के प्रकार की जांच करने की आवश्यकता होगी.
Right. So this is highly convenient. So you can read it as well. So I'm going to go and respond to this. मैं एक 2 एकड़ की जमीन पे खेती करता हूँ और लगभग 10,000 रुपये महीने का बनाता हूँ. So as part of the persona, I say that I'm a farmer who farms in a 2-acre field and make about 10,000 rupees per month. Now the GPT model in this case has been specialized to factually answer questions on eligibility based on the actual eligibility that the government has laid out. Right? So it says आपने जो जानकारी दी है उसके आधार पर आप पीएम किसान के लिए योग्य प्रतीत होते हैं. You appear to be eligible based on the details you have said. हालांकि मैं आपको पीएम किसान पोर्टल के साथ डबल चेक करने की सलाह देता हूँ. I would recommend you to double check with the portal. So it's being conservative, not authoritative currently, right? And so that's good. So it seems like I'm eligible. I can say मुझे कितना पैसा मिलेगा. How much money would I get as part of the scheme? So यदि आप पीएम किसान के लिए पात्र हैं तो आप रुपए प्राप्त करने की उम्मीद कर सकते हैं 3 समान किस्तों में 6,000 रुपये प्रति वर्ष, प्रत्येक 4 महीने में 2,000 रुपये. So it firstly.
So this is another example of an interaction that happened. I was also just quickly glancing over a couple of questions that was there in the chat box, right? I think 2 things, right? Like the problem with official answers, and that's not really a problem, it's a feature, is that certain words are used largely to ensure that the answer is holistic, complete, but they may not be very easy for general citizens to comprehend. And that's why like some of these systems like also show us a very interesting side where it is trying to dumb it down, which is trying to abstract, summarize it, choosing to remove certain words. And that's why citing it as an official answer may not be a very good idea, but using it as a companion to understand content might be a very, very good idea, because you could always go back and learn some of those words and have a much more accurate understanding, but it'll just shorten the amount of time it takes for you to comprehend and learn a particular topic. So just something that got to my mind when I was watching this. And in terms of language coverage, see, the thing is, most of these things are built in a modular way. Right now, Bhashini supports 22 languages, so that's the focus. So it's not just Hindi, definitely. Telugu, Tamil, Odia, some of these languages are already covered. But the idea really is that as we have more of these languages and they are available as an API, some of these things can be integrated in almost any application that you can imagine. So just a very quick review, walkthrough of what we went through. We went through some of the high stakes use cases, which could be like summarization of public consultation, public consultation. Emergency response could be highly aided. You could imagine it to be a completely offline, deployed on a very, very small chipset system, which is probably kept in a Kumbh setting where a person who is lost can press a button and really know like how to how do you reach out to police or something, like wild ideas, but something which is possible probably, right? Document review and drafting is where we are seeing, at least in the legal space, a lot of activity happening. There are big big companies which has been acquired because they're working on using AI for legal document review and drafting. So some of those areas are where we are seeing a lot of momentum going on. Some of the low stakes use cases are probably like immediately servable. For example, departmental question and answers, just like how we saw in case of knowledge GPT, and public inquiries, information dissemination, where now we have language models and we have GPTs which can help make the responses very, very consumable by bridging the comprehension gap. These are 4 examples of relevance, and if you look at all 4 of them, the underlying architecture is very, very similar in terms of like how they are functioning, and then it's just about like identifying opportunities where there is a problem with respect to comprehension and access to knowledge, and that can be hugely aided by these systems, right? Okay, so last part, which is being future ready. I think being future ready, the idea really is that most of the generative AI application stack almost looks like this, right? So at the bottom level, you have data. Without data, what you are really relying on is GPT's understanding. Why these systems work very well, why they are very accurate in their response, is because we are making generated by OpenAI. The reason why it was not working really, really well is because parametric knowledge is being used, and that does not give you a very accurate response. The moment you have an authoritative document and reasoning on that, the quality just flips, right? Like it's very, very high quality responses. In fact, a lot of work has happened in terms of ensuring that the response is accurate. But if your data is going to have contradictory information and things like that, then it becomes very difficult for these machines to answer this. And just a quick insight on it. But almost all the generative AI application stack almost looks like this. Something that we saw in the Jagit video also, where at the bottom you have data, then you have a speech layer, and again highlighting speech layer does not mean just like like one model. These are probably like 3 or 4 models which are chained together to be functioning, right? For example, in case of Jagrit, when a person is speaking in Hindi and getting a response in Hindi back, the work that is happening is that the speech is basically getting transcribed. So ASR, automatic speech recognition, is in place. That text is getting translated because we are using English as a knowledge base. So there's a translation layer. Once the response is generated, then we are taking the text and we are translating it back. So so text to speech is again in play, right? And this whole thing basically gives me a feel of speech to speech. The field has also advanced a little bit, so now we can do like speech-to-speech translation directly. Adding GPT abilities there might itself be a very interesting work that the system takes away. Authoritative document, which basically helps me have much more reliance on this, much more trust on it, is very, very interesting. Where we have seen like systems performing really, really well in terms of accuracy and relevancy of response. And when we think about like applications, I think it ranges from chatbots to simulators and things like that. User interface, another critical element for all of us to consider in terms of who are our potential users going to be and where they are at currently. Reaching where they are at hugely enhances both the adoption as well as eases out the end users in accessing some of these services. Some of the keywords that you would probably hear much more often in this space is something called retrieval augmented generation. Retrieval augmented generation, in very simple terms, is that I take this authoritative document, maybe 2000 page document. I will extract the text from all of that 2000 pages. Then I will create smaller chunks, equal size, smaller chunks of these text, and then I'll create a number representation of it. So that whenever you ask me a particular query, I will create a number representation of that also. Now I have 2 number representations, and then I will be able to find out which number representation is closely linked to your query. This allows me to semantically find the information from a very, very vast knowledge base, right? Some of the databases that you will hear is vector database and graph database. Vector database is what I just explained, where this number representation of text is stored. Graph databases is where you will store particular entities and their values. Again, as I was saying, in speech models, we are talking about speech to text, translation, and text to speech. With respect to large language, 3.5 or 4. These are 2 different models provided by OpenAI. In addition, you would also hear about Llama 2, Falcon, Vicuna, some of these models, which are open source models. You would also hear about context window. Context window is how much text can a large language model really intake. And that could vary from 4,000 tokens to 16,000 tokens. And in case in other cases where Anthropic and some of those models have come in, almost 100,000 context window. And just to give you a ballpark in terms of how do you think about it, 4K context would be almost 2 pages worth of text on an A4 sheet, right? 16K would be much, now you can just like multiply those things, and 32K almost becomes like a 50 pages at one go, right? That's the amount of text that a large language model can really like take input in one shot, right? So that's the understanding of context window. This is just to give you a very intuitive sense in terms of like how do you think for these things. So how can we be future ready? I think access to data is one of the biggest things there. If you do not have access to data, a bunch of these things just don't work, right? And Mighty has already open sourced language models, language data they have collected as part of Bhashini models, and you can already see that bunch of these things have been translated into speech models, text models. And innovation starts getting unlocked the moment you have open data available to a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs, right? Open API is again a very important area in terms of linking services together, in terms of building technologies which are middle layers, not necessarily end services themselves. Open APIs, and when I say open APIs, I don't mean no authentication, have API access to everyone. Open API is a particular kind of specification of API, so that if you build it, everyone else is also building accordingly, and then there will be no problem in me accessing your services, right? So having some of those standardization in whatever you're building is going to hugely help you getting access to other services and someone else getting access to your services, right? Without open data, the quality of large language models, whether you rely on something proprietary, whether you rely on open source, everything is going to suffer in the absence of this open data. Another thing that we have at least both experienced and noticed is the change management that is required. Working alongside AI requires you to have much sharper view of things than you could have otherwise. So AI does not mean that the work is less. It's just that there's a very different kind of work, right? Like now you are probably reviewing much more. Now you're looking for insights, contradictions much more finely than you would do otherwise. And if you do not do that, then the threat is automation bias. Then the system is probably churning out stuff, and then you are probably like pushing it out as if you were not there in the part of the process itself, right? But that automation bias could, backfire like really bad. Because at the end of the day, some human being almost always owns what is the output of the machine, right? Like it's not the machine which is roaming around and doing its thing. I think standardization is third component, which is very critical in us being future ready, right? Like data standards, standardizing names across. I think this is one problem that happens in like law and justice a lot, where depending on the jurisdiction, same thing might be called very different things. And what it basically fundamentally hinders is our ability to look at problems as at a much higher level. Then you are looking at problems at a jurisdiction level, and then you do not have a very good view of this, right? Or in the best case scenario, you are probably building that middle layer which can translate these like entities. For example, Satbara is something that Maharashtra basically calls a document title, and that would be called something absolutely different in Bihar. So some of those things comes in, like, so standardization of some of these entities, I think, is a very interesting area which keeps us future ready. ONDC, for example, is using something called Beacon protocol. Now that protocol standardizes almost all the commercial transactions that's happening, right? This allows multiple systems to work together with each other and keeps the friction really low, and also ensures that the system is not centralized but decentralized. With respect to using large language model based applications, now this is the framework for all of you to sort of like consider if you're thinking about deploying some of these technology. Hosting LLMs, at least till January, was something very difficult for any organization to do, largely because the large language models which worked very well, they were in the they were proprietary, they were not open source, and they consumed a lot of like GPUs. Today you can take one of these open source models and you can host it onto your own server under your own container, so that all the issues that you had with respect to security with your data leaving your server, that can be mitigated. But it can be costly. It can cost almost like $8.5 per hour if you do not use any technique to shrink the size of the model, where the trade-off is between shrinking the size of the model and performance, right? So a high utilization or different departments pooling in to have like a LLM which works across different departments usually helps, because if you have very high volume, the cost will be easier to justify. Data availability, which is again machine readable data, benchmarking data to ensure that the services that you're buying. So even if you do not build any AI service, if you are buying an AI service, how do you know whether it works or not, right? So having some sense of benchmark data so that these services can be tested on a neutral ground will become very critical. User interfaces, again, messaging apps, IVRs, websites, these are choices. What you should be looking out for is that low stakes use cases. Some of these things basically require time. These are not like instant. So a user might feel like 12 to 15 seconds of lag, depending on like how complex the activity is. In low stakes use cases, lag isn't that big a problem. In high stakes use cases, so for example, in an emergency response use cases, you want to be sure that the response is coming, right? You want to be sure that it doesn't take a lot of time. And some of those considerations may basically start becoming a deal breaker. So you might have a very good idea which requires an LLM and requires implementation, but watch out for whether the implementation itself is going to require a lot of time, whether it works for the user or not, right? With respect to proprietary LLMs versus open source LLMs, which I have heard a lot of curiosity around, open source LLMs can be hosted privately on your own servers. In fact, you can download it and run it on your own laptop locally. Proprietary LLMs can have better quality of response. And that is something that benchmark data, which is publicly available, which academia sort of like publishes very regularly, they show that proprietary LLMs can be much higher in quality. But then the third thing that we are learning is also that the quality gap between proprietary and open source large language models is reducing day by day, right? Which basically means it's a matter of when these models catch up and are at par with quality with proprietary models. And the biggest bottleneck or biggest catalyst of this transition is going to be the availability of quality of data. And on that note, just a couple of projects that you can look out for. One is LangChain. LangChain is what is used to implement a lot of these applications. Llama Index is another project which basically helps you build these chat systems really, really quick. Chroma is a vector database. Again, by the way, none of them have sponsored this talk, so this is just in the interest of knowing what are some of the things that industry is using today. Fast API is another open source project. By the way, all of these are open source projects. Fast API is another open source project which allows you to build API services really, really fast. Where we have seen by using a combination of these technologies, you can experiment and get something out really, really fast. On that note, Purvi and everyone else, thank you so much. Thank you so much for indulging with me. I'm happy to take any questions.
Hope you enjoyed this masterclass and thank you for watching. Don't forget to tune into our next one.